My name is Vanessa Gonzalez. I'm 36 years old, and the story I'm telling you happened last fall, back when our lives still followed a familiar but unstable rhythm, like a chair with one loose leg that you keep sitting on anyway. That Saturday night, I was on the old couch in our two-bedroom apartment in Erie, refreshing my banking app, like staring at the number could change it. $342. That was every penny we had until payday. Enough to get through the week, as long as nothing went wrong. In the corner of the living room, my 7-year-old Sadie was playing with her doll, but even while she played, she listened, too carefully for a child her age. She'd glance up when my voice tightened. She'd pause when Aiden sighed. Sometimes kids don't understand bills, but they understand tension. Sadie mumbled to her doll, "When I grow up, I'm gonna make money and buy Mommy a house." My chest squeezed so hard it almost hurt. Aiden, my boyfriend, sat across from me with his phone in his hand. He was scrolling, jaw set like he was studying for a test he didn't want to fail. "What are you reading now?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He didn't look up. "Just stuff. Parenting stuff." "Parenting stuff," I repeated, because that was the kind of vague answer people gave when they didn't want follow-up questions. Aiden finally set the phone down and rubbed his face. "Vanessa, we can't keep doing this. The separate meals, the bargaining, it's exhausting." He wasn't wrong. With my maintenance tech salary and his warehouse job, we didn't have the luxury of wasting food, but whenever Sadie refused something, we'd end up cooking something else. A different side, a different protein, a whole separate plate like we were running a restaurant out of a cramped kitchen. "What did she even refuse this week?" Aiden asked. "Chicken again? Eggs? And now fish is like the enemy?" At the word fish, I felt Sadie's little body go still across the room. I kept my voice calm. "She's not being difficult just to be difficult. She gets scared." Aiden exhaled, like he'd been holding in a speech. "That's exactly it. She's scared of everything. And I don't want to raise a kid who breaks down every time life gets uncomfortable." That's when I saw it. His phone lighting up again, face down on the couch cushion. A name flashed across the screen in a quick glow. Brielle. I pretended I didn't notice. My heart did that annoying thing where it thumped too loud in my ears. Brielle was Aiden's ex-girlfriend. Not a mystery. Not a secret, just a ghost that never fully left the room. He told me months ago she liked to send him helpful links because she's into self-improvement. And I'd tried to be mature about it, tried to be the woman who didn't get threatened by a notification. But lately, it wasn't occasional. It was constant. Aiden cleared his throat. "I read about this method. Tough love. It's supposed to help kids build adaptability." I froze because 2 words can unlock a whole childhood. Tough love. My father loved that phrase. He used it like a weapon, like a holy rule nobody was allowed to question. Tough love was why I learned to swallow food that made me gag. Tough love was why crying was acting. Tough love was why I grew up with a knot in my throat that never fully disappeared. "You know my dad did that," I said quietly. Aiden's gaze softened for half a second, then hardened again, like he was forcing himself not to back down. "And you turned out okay." That sentence always sounds like a compliment, until you realize what it really means. "You survived, so it must have been fine." I looked across the room at Sadie. Her doll was forgotten in her lap now. She was watching us like she was reading a weather forecast. And then she did something that still breaks me. She got up, walked over slowly, and hugged her doll so tight her little arms shook. "Mommy," she said softly, "tomorrow we're going to Grandpa Harlan's house, right?" "Yeah, baby," I said, forcing brightness into my voice. She swallowed, eyes flicking to Aiden and then back to me. "I love seeing Grandpa." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "But will he make me eat fish?" Aiden opened his mouth, probably to reassure her with logic. But I moved first. I crouched down and pulled her into my arms, breathing in her shampoo, the warmth of her small body, the fragile trust in the way she leaned into me. "No," I promised. "I'll protect you." Sadie nodded, but her eyes didn't relax. It was like she wanted to believe me, but didn't know if promises worked on grown-ups. That night, after I tucked her into bed, she reached for my hand in the dark. "Mommy," she whispered, "you won't let him make me, right?" "I won't," I said again, louder, like saying it twice made it stronger. "I'm on your side." She finally let go and rolled over with a quiet little sigh. And I sat there in the dim light, staring at her small shoulders rising and falling, trying not to feel the fear crawling up my spine. Because the truth was, I hadn't been inside my father's house without becoming a child again. The next morning, Sunday, the last Sunday of the month, like I'd promised my parents when I moved out, We got in the car and drove the 20-plus miles to the suburbs. It wasn't far, but it felt like crossing a line I'd spent my whole adult life trying not to cross. Sadie sat in the back seat looking out at the fields, hugging her doll like it was a shield. Aiden drove with both hands tight on the wheel, the way he always did when he wanted to look calm. I watched the road and tried to rehearse bravery, like lines in a play. If Dad pushes, I push back. If Sadie says no, I say no. If the smell of fish hits us, I don't fold. Then we turned onto my parents' street, and before we even reached the porch, the air changed. The smell rolled out of the house like it was waiting for us. Grilled freshwater salmon, rich and sharp and unmistakable. Sadie made a small sound in the back seat, not quite a cry, not quite a gasp. When we parked, her little hand slid into mine instantly. It was trembling. I looked at her, and she looked at me, eyes pleading, already asking the question she was too scared to say out loud. And standing in the doorway, like a man greeting guests to a ceremony he controlled, was my father. Harlan. Proud smile, loud presence. The kind of confidence that filled up a room and left no space for anyone else's feelings. He spread his arms as if we were arriving to honor him, not just to visit. And in that moment, with Sadie's fingers clamped around mine and the smell of salmon coating the air, I felt my promise wobble, like that loose-legged chair, like something about to collapse. The front door was open, but it didn't feel like an invitation. It felt like stepping onto a stage where I already knew my role. My father's house looked exactly the same as it always had. White siding, trimmed hedges, the porch light that never flickered, even when everything else in my life felt unsteady. My body remembered this place the way a bruise remembers a hand. Sadie stayed glued to my side as we walked up the steps. Her doll was tucked under one arm, her other hand locked around my fingers so tight it hurt. Harlan's grin widened like he could smell fear the way he could smell fish. "There's my girl," he boomed, slapping my shoulder hard enough to jolt my bones. Then he leaned down, eyes bright, voice loud like we were at a football game. "Sadie!" Sadie forced a smile, just a thin, polite curve of her lips. But she edged backward until her legs bumped mine, like my body was the safest wall she could find. My mother, Wanda, hovered in the kitchen doorway, apron tied neatly, wooden spoon in her hand. Her expression wasn't welcoming the way it should have been. It was worried. She glanced at Sadie, and for a split second her eyes softened, like she wanted to step in front of my daughter and shield her. But she didn't. Wanda had spent her entire marriage learning when to speak and when silence was safer. Harlan turned and pointed toward the dining table with a flourish. 5 whole freshwater salmon lay arranged like trophies, silver skin gleaming under the kitchen lights. Their bodies were intact, heads still on, mouths slightly open like they were frozen mid-complaint. Sadie's shoulders jumped. Her grip on my hand tightened again. "A fishing trip," Harlan announced proudly, as if he'd just returned from war. 3 days on the lake. Caught every one of those beauties myself. I felt Aiden straighten beside me, like he'd been waiting for an audition. "That's impressive," Aiden said quickly, a little too eager. He stepped forward, trying to match my father's energy. "Seriously, sir, not everyone can do that." Harlan's gaze flicked to Aiden. A measuring look, the kind he used on men to decide whether they were worth respect. "Aiden, right?" he said, as if testing the name. "Yes, sir." Harlan nodded once. "Good, strong name." My stomach tightened. In my father's world, strength wasn't a personality trait. It was a badge you either wore proudly or had ripped off you in public. Sadie's eyes darted to the fish again. I felt her swallow hard. I wanted to say something. Anything. A joke. A redirection. "Hey, Dad, maybe let's not start with the fish." But my throat felt locked, like the house itself had hands around it. Wanda stepped closer, voice quiet. "Sadie, sweetheart, do you want some juice?" Sadie nodded quickly, without looking away from the table. But before Wanda could pour anything, Harlan clapped his hands and launched into his story. He talked like he was narrating an epic. How the waves hit, how cold the air was, how long he waited for the school of fish, how his patience was the reason he succeeded. And every word was really a lesson he expected us to absorb. Aiden listened like a student. I watched Sadie shrink into herself, hugging her doll so tight its fabric wrinkled. At one point I tried to steer things away. "So, Dad, how's the garden? Still growing those tomatoes you brag about?" Harlan chuckled and waved it off like it was irrelevant. "Garden's fine, but you know what builds real character? Fishing, waiting, enduring, not whining when it's uncomfortable." My heart sank. This wasn't small talk. This was him setting the table, just not with plates. He paused, took a sip of water, then turned his gaze on Sadie like she was the main topic. You know, he said, voice lowering into something almost gentle, kids these days are too soft. They complain. They refuse food. They think the world owes them comfort. My blood went cold. Sadie didn't think the world owed her comfort. She was 7. She was afraid of choking. She was afraid of being forced. But my father spoke like fear was a crime. Wanda's fingers twitched around the wooden spoon. She looked at me, quickly, almost pleading. Then she looked away as if she was ashamed for even hoping I'd intervene. Aiden leaned forward, nodding. I actually read something about that last night, he said, about how parents have to teach resilience. There it was, that phrase again. Resilience, a pretty word that people use to make pain sound noble. I glanced at Aiden, confused, because the way he said it didn't sound like him. It sounded rehearsed. And then his phone buzzed. Just once, soft. He didn't pick it up, but I saw the screen light up on the couch. Brielle, don't let her manipulate with fear. Kids learn what works. My chest tightened so fast I almost gasped. I stared at Aiden. He didn't notice my face, or if he did, he pretended not to. He kept listening to my father like approval was oxygen. I forced myself to breathe, forced myself to remember. This is about Sadie, not my pride, not my old wounds. But my old wounds were screaming. Harlan stood up suddenly and slapped my shoulder again. Come on, he said, I want to show you something. I already knew what that meant. Not a tour, not a conversation. A test. He guided me to the corner of the living room, away from Wanda, away from Sadie, away from Aiden. His palm stayed on my shoulder the entire time, heavy, controlling. He leaned in, voice dropping. You know, he began, when I was a kid, your grandfather taught me to swim by throwing me into a deep lake. My stomach flipped. Harlan's eyes gleamed, like he was proud of the cruelty. I panicked, swallowed water, thought I was going to die. He smiled as if that was funny. But I learned to swim. And after that, I was never afraid of water again. I didn't answer. I couldn't, because all I could see was Sadie choking, tears streaming, and someone calling it a lesson. Harlan's smile faded. He stared at me harder. Sometimes children have to be pushed into difficult situations to become strong. If you keep rescuing them, they'll never grow up. A memory hit me so sharply it felt like a slap. I was 10 years old, walking home in heavy snow because my father said independence mattered. My hands purple, feet numb, tears freezing on my face. And when I finally reached home, shaking, exhausted, I saw his car in the garage. He could have picked me up. He chose not to. Vanessa, Harlan said, snapping me back to the present. You're raising a crybaby. The words pierced me like a needle under my skin. I opened my mouth to fight back. Finally. But before I could, Aiden walked over. He placed his hand gently on my arm like he was calming me, not supporting me. I think your dad has a point, he said softly, eyes flicking to Harlan with respect. We've talked about it. We need to be a little tougher with Sadie. My throat tightened so hard I tasted metal. I turned to Aiden, disbelief burning in my eyes. We talked about it, I repeated. He didn't meet my gaze fully. He looked nervous, like he didn't want conflict with my father, like he didn't want conflict with me either. Harlan nodded, satisfied. Good. At least someone in this house understands. Then, right on cue, Sadie appeared in the doorway. She took one step inside, smelled the fish again, and froze. Her eyes went straight to mine. Not Wanda's. Not Aiden's. Mine. Mom, she asked quietly, voice trembling, I don't have to eat fish tonight, right? The room fell still. 2 men watched me, one with expectation, one with hope that I'd agree with him. And my daughter watched me, like my answer was the difference between safety and danger. I knelt down so we were eye level. I could feel Harlan's presence behind me like a shadow. I could feel Aiden's hand hovering, like he was silently urging me not to make a scene. Sadie's lips trembled. I wanted to tell her the truth. No, you don't have to, I promised. But instead, I heard my own voice come out softer, weaker, shaped by old fear. Sadie, I said, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. You're growing up now. It's time to learn to face your fears. Her face fell, just a fraction. I rushed to patch it, like a liar trying to sound loving. I'll be right beside you, I added, but you need to try. Sadie stared at me. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just nodded slowly, like a child accepting a sentence. And as she turned away, hugging her doll tighter, I felt something inside me crack. Because deep down I knew what I'd just done. I hadn't taught my daughter bravery. I'd taught her that when powerful adults pressure you, even your mother might fold. Around 6 o'clock, we sat down at the dinner table. Wanda carried out baked potatoes, steamed vegetables, and the salmon. this time grilled golden brown, fragrant, crackling at the edges. Harlan set the platter down like he was presenting a prize. Sadie sat very still. Her small hands disappeared under the table. And when my father reached for the serving fork and turned toward her plate, I realized it wasn't just dinner. It was the moment my promise would either become real or become a lie I'd never forgive myself for. The clink of cutlery sounded louder than it should have. It always does when no one is really hungry. Harlan served the fish with ceremony. He placed a generous portion on his own plate, then on Wanda's, then on Aiden's. When he reached Sadie, he paused, just long enough to make a point, before laying a smaller piece on her plate. "Just enough," he said, smiling like this was kindness. "You'll see, it's good for you." Sadie's eyes locked onto the fish. The skin was crisp and brown, but beneath it I could see the faint outline of thin bones, barely visible, like a warning written in invisible ink. Wanda half rose from her chair. "I can help debone it for her." Harlan lifted a single finger. Calm. Final. "She needs to learn." Wanda froze, then slowly sat back down. Her shoulders slumped like someone who had just lost an argument she'd been losing her whole life. Aiden leaned closer to Sadie, voice gentle but firm. "Look at us, kiddo. We're all eating it. You can do it too." Sadie didn't answer. She slid her fork into the edge of the fish, hands shaking so badly the plate rattled. I watched every movement. I should have stopped it right there. She cut a tiny piece from the tail end, the safest part. She lifted it carefully to her mouth, chewed slowly, painfully aware of every texture. Then she swallowed. She looked up at me. Nothing happened. No coughing, no choking. Relief flooded me so fast my eyes stung. "Maybe they're right," a small, traitorous voice whispered. "Maybe I overreacted." Harlan slapped my shoulder, pride glowing in his eyes. "See? That's my granddaughter." Sadie took another bite. This one was bigger, from the thicker middle of the fish, where the meat looked soft, but where tiny rib bones hid like splinters. She chewed slowly, too slowly. Then she swallowed. Her face changed. It was subtle at first, just a flicker. Then her hand rose to her throat. "Mom," she whispered, barely audible. "My throat hurts." Harlan waved it off instantly. "That's just in your head, sweetheart. Drink some water." Aiden nodded, trying to sound encouraging, not annoyed. "You're doing great, Sadie. Don't pretend. Keep going." Pretend. The word hit me like ice water. I looked into Sadie's eyes. Those weren't the eyes of a child pretending. Those were the eyes of real fear. She took a sip of water, winced, coughed lightly. Tears welled, rolling down her cheeks without sound. Something inside me broke. I pushed my chair back so hard it scraped against the floor, the sound sharp enough to cut through the room. "Enough!" Every head snapped toward me. Sadie froze, eyes wide. "She doesn't need to eat fish anymore," I said, my voice shaking but loud. Louder than I'd ever spoken to my father at his own table. Harlan's jaw tightened. "Vanessa, don't make a scene. She needs to learn." "No," I cut him off. My hands trembled as I lifted Sadie's plate and set it aside. "She's in pain. I can see it." I scooped vegetables and potatoes onto a clean plate and slid it in front of Sadie. "You're done with the fish." The room went silent. Sadie looked up at me, tears clinging to her lashes, disbelief written all over her face, like she couldn't quite trust that I meant it. I smiled at her, really smiled this time. "Eat this, baby." She nodded, relief washing over her features like she'd been holding her breath for hours. Harlan stared at me like I'd committed a crime. Aiden looked confused, torn, like he wasn't sure if I'd just protected our daughter or embarrassed him. Dinner ended under a heavy cloud. Afterward, Harlan retreated to his armchair and turned the TV on full volume, the way he always did when he wanted an argument to die without resolution. Sadie sat beside me on the couch, swallowing occasionally, her brow furrowed. "Does it still hurt?" I asked quietly. She nodded, touching her throat. "A little." I told myself it would pass. I told myself I'd done enough. I was wrong. Wanda brought her a glass of warm water. Sadie took a sip and immediately bent forward, coughing harder this time. Her small body shook with each cough. "Are you okay?" Aiden asked, standing up. Sadie shook her head, panic flooding her face. Tears poured freely now. "It hurts," she cried, voice breaking. "It's cutting my throat. I'm scared." From the armchair, without even turning around, Harlan muttered, "She's just acting. Let her sit there." Then Sadie coughed again, violent, uncontrollable. Wanda rushed over with the tissue. Sadie coughed into it, and I saw red, a streak of fresh blood against white paper. Time stopped. Sadie stared at it, eyes wide with horror, then looked at me like she was drowning and I was the only lifeline left. That was it. I didn't ask permission. I scooped her up into my arms. Bathroom, now. Under the harsh bathroom light, everything became terrifyingly clear. She did, and cried out in pain. I shone my phone's flashlight inside. And there it was. A long, sharp fishbone lodged sideways in her throat, cutting into swollen, bleeding flesh. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. I grabbed the tweezers from the medicine cabinet, my heart pounding like it was trying to escape my chest. Aiden stood frozen behind me, pale. Wanda wiped Sadie's tears with a damp cloth, whispering apologies over and over. Harlan appeared in the doorway. For the first time, his face wasn't hard. It was lost. I took a breath so deep it hurt. Sweetheart, I whispered, gripping Sadie's hand. This will hurt for a second, but then it'll stop, I promise. She nodded through her tears. I reached in, steady, careful, and pulled. Sadie screamed, then gasped, then went still. The bone came free, slick with blood, thin and sharp as a needle. After a few seconds, Sadie's breathing slowed. Her face relaxed. It's gone, she whispered. I held up the bone under the light and turned slowly to face the room. This, I said, my voice low and shaking, was real pain, not pretending, not weakness. No one spoke. Harlan stared at the bone like it was a mirror. And in that silence, I knew something had shifted, something that could never be put back the way it was before. The bone lay on the white paper towel like evidence in a courtroom. No one spoke. The TV murmured from the living room, some sports announcer laughing at a joke that belonged to another universe. In the bathroom, the air felt too thick to breathe. Sadie sat on the edge of the tub wrapped in Wanda's arms, her small body trembling from shock and leftover pain. She kept swallowing carefully, like she didn't trust her throat yet. I watched her every move, my heart hammering with guilt so sharp it made my chest ache. I had promised to protect her, and I almost failed. Aiden finally broke the silence, his voice hoarse. I didn't think it could be that bad. I didn't look at him. If I did, I might say something I couldn't take back. Wanda whispered, I should have stopped it. I should have said something. Her eyes flicked to Harlan, then away, decades of habit pulling her mouth closed. My father stood in the doorway, hands gripping the frame like he needed it to stay upright. His face looked older than it had an hour ago, smaller. Not angry, not defensive, just shaken. I folded the paper towel carefully, wrapping the fishbone inside it, then stepped closer to him. I held it up between us, my hand steady even though everything inside me was shaking. Dad, I said quietly, sometimes the real danger isn't protecting a child too much. His eyes lifted to mine. It's refusing to listen when they tell us they're in pain. He didn't answer, but his fingers tightened until his knuckles turned white. That night ended without another argument, which somehow hurt more. We packed our things in silence. Sadie stayed close to me, her doll tucked under her chin, eyelids heavy, but refusing to close like she was afraid something might happen if she stopped watching. Harlan didn't come downstairs to say goodbye. Wanda hugged Sadie tightly, tears soaking into her hair. Grandma's so sorry, she whispered. So sorry. Sadie nodded but didn't speak. The drive home was quiet. Too quiet. Sadie fell asleep halfway there, her small breaths finally even. I reached back at a red light and rested my fingers on her knee, grounding myself in the warmth of her. Aiden stared straight ahead the whole way. Neither of us spoke. The next 2 weeks felt suspended, like time was holding its breath. No calls. No messages. No surprise apologies or defensive explanations. Part of me expected my father to double down, to call and insist he'd been right, that kids bounce back. But nothing came, and that scared me more. One Saturday evening, there was a knock at our apartment door. Not loud, not confident, just hesitant. When I opened it, my heart stopped. Harlan stood there holding a small paper bag. His shoulders were slumped. His eyes darted around the hallway like he wasn't sure he was welcome. He began, then cleared his throat. Can I come in? I stepped aside without a word. The apartment seemed to shrink around him. He looked at the peeling couch, the tiny dining table, Sadie's toys lined up in careful rows. Something shifted in his expression, like he was seeing my life for the first time instead of imagining it. Sadie peeked out from the bedroom. The moment she saw him, she froze. Then she stepped backward and pressed herself against my leg, hiding behind me like I was a shield. Harlan noticed. It hit him hard. He knelt slowly, awkwardly, like his knees weren't used to that position anymore. From the bag, he pulled out a small brown teddy bear, its fur soft and worn like it had already been loved. I brought you a friend, he said gently, to help when you're scared. Sadie stared at the bear, then at him. She didn't move. Harlan didn't push. He just stayed there, kneeling, waiting. After a long moment, Sadie reached out and took the bear. She hugged it tightly to her chest. Harlan's voice trembled. Can I have a hug? Sadie looked up at me, eyes searching. I nodded. Slowly, carefully, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Harlan hugged her like she was made of glass. His shoulders shook. He was crying. Later, over coffee that went cold on the table, Sadie sat on his lap, asking questions only children can ask without cruelty. When Grandpa was sad, who hugged you? Harlan stared at the wall for a long time before answering. No one, he said quietly. People didn't do that back then. That's really sad, Sadie said simply. He nodded. It was. And in that moment, I realized something had cracked inside my father. Not out of anger, but out of love. After Sadie fell asleep that night, clutching the teddy bear to her chest like it was armor, the apartment felt strangely quiet. Not tense, not heavy, just thoughtful. Harlan stayed behind while Wanda went home early, saying she was tired. I knew better. She needed space to process the version of her husband she'd seen tonight, the one who knelt, who waited, who cried. Aiden stood in the kitchen rinsing mugs that didn't really need rinsing. His shoulders were stiff, movements too deliberate. Finally, he spoke. I messed up, he said quietly. I didn't turn around. He continued anyway. I wanted your dad to respect me. I didn't want to look weak, and I let that matter more than what Sadie was telling us. I leaned against the counter, eyes closed. You also let someone else's voice guide you. He flinched. Brielle, he said, not denying it. She kept sending me articles, videos, saying kids test boundaries, that fear is manipulation. And you believed her over your own instincts, I asked. He swallowed. I believed confidence, and I thought confidence meant strength. We stood there for a long moment, the weight of almost loss hanging between us. I told her to stop, he said finally. Tonight. I told her she doesn't get a say in our family. I nodded, still not ready to say thank you. Trust doesn't rebuild that fast. From the living room, Harlan cleared his throat. I didn't come to interfere, he said, staring into his coffee. I came to apologize. I looked at him then. Really looked. He wasn't the man who'd towered over me my whole childhood. He looked smaller, tired, human. I thought fear made kids tough, he continued, because fear made me survive. Sadie's question echoed in the silence. Who hugged you? I didn't know there was another way, he said. I crossed my arms, not defensive, protective. There is, and if you want to be in Sadie's life, that's the way. He nodded. No argument, no lecture. Just acceptance. In the weeks that followed, change came quietly. Harlan didn't announce it. He didn't demand credit. He just did better. Wanda called one evening, her voice trembling. Your father cooked spaghetti today. No fish. He practiced 3 times before he got it right. Another time, she laughed softly. He borrowed a book from the library about child psychology. He pretended it was for general knowledge, but I know. When we finally asked Sadie about visiting again, we didn't push. The first time, she shook her head and hugged the teddy bear tighter. The second time, she stayed quiet. The third time, she asked, Will Grandpa make me eat fish? No, I said immediately, and if you say stop, we leave. She nodded. The next Sunday, we drove back to my parents' house. But this time, Harlan waited on the porch, hands clasped like he was nervous. When Sadie stepped out of the car, he knelt down again. I have gloves for you, he said, for planting tomatoes. Sadie looked at me. I nodded. She took his hand. That day there was no pressure, no lessons disguised as tests, no fish at dinner. Harlan wore an apron. Wanda smiled more than I'd seen her smile in years. Aiden and I washed dishes while Sadie laughed in the living room as Harlan struggled to learn a simple game on her tablet. Later, as I tucked Sadie into bed, she looked up at me. Mom, she said, hugging her bear, I like it when Grandpa laughs. So do I whispered. 1 year has passed since that dinner. We're still not rich. Life is still messy. Parenting is still terrifying. But our home is safer. And I learned something I wish I'd known sooner. Real toughness isn't forcing children to endure pain. It's having the courage to listen when they say they're hurting, even when everyone else tells you to ignore them. If you were in my place, would you have stopped it sooner?